Fraser Valley, Colorado Territory. Autumn 1879. While his neighbors built their chimneys the way they always had, straight, simple, functional, Samuel Brennick was constructing something they'd never seen before. A chimney with two walls. An air gap running its entire height. A smoke chamber that curved and angled in ways that made no sense to men who'd been building fireplaces for 20 years. They called it overcomplicated. A waste of stone. Highland foolishness from a man who didn't understand how things worked in the Rockies. But when the brutal winter of 1880 arrived, the temperature inside Brennick's cabin told a different story. While his neighbors shivered at 37 degrees Fahrenheit, burning through cords of wood just to keep water from freezing, Brennick's family sat comfortably at 68 degrees Fahrenheit, using less than half the fuel. What did this Scottish stonemason understand about heat that experienced frontier builders had missed? If you want to discover frontier survival techniques that actually work, hit that like button and subscribe. Drop a comment if you've ever seen unusual chimney designs in old homesteads. September 14th, 1879. Fraser Valley stretched across the Colorado high country at 8,750 feet elevation, where winter wasn't a season. It was a test of engineering. Samuel Brennick had arrived 6 months earlier from Inverness, carrying tools, limestone knowledge, and a reputation that hadn't yet been built or broken. His neighbor, James Walcott, watched Brennick lay the foundation for his chimney and shook his head. "You're doubling your work for nothing," Walcott said, gesturing at the parallel stone walls rising from the hearth. "One wall holds smoke just fine. Been doing it that way since my grandfather's time." Brennick didn't argue. He simply continued setting sandstone blocks with a 4-inch gap between the inner and outer walls, filling the space with smaller rocks and clay. The precision was unusual for frontier construction. Each stone selected for thermal properties, each joint packed tight to prevent air leakage in the smoke channel while deliberately allowing circulation in the gap. "What's that space for?" asked Thomas Bradley, a mason who'd built 17 chimneys in the valley. "You're just creating a place for animals to nest and drafts to form." "Heat storage," Brennick replied, his Highland accent still thick. "And circulation." Bradley dismissed it with a wave. "Heat goes up and out. That's physics. You can't store what's meant to escape." But Brennick's design did something Bradley's experience hadn't accounted for. The inner wall, constructed from dense sandstone, absorbed radiant heat from the fire. The outer wall, built from lighter limestone, provided insulation. The 4-inch air gap between them created a convection current. Cool air entering at the base, warming as it rose, radiating heat into the cabin from both sides of the chimney mass. At the top, Brennick installed a smoke chamber that didn't rise straight up. Instead, it angled at 47 degrees for 18 inches before straightening, creating a baffle that slowed exhaust gases just long enough for the stone to capture more heat. The design added 400 pounds of thermal mass compared to standard chimneys and created roughly 73% more radiant surface area inside the living space. "Overcomplicated nonsense," Bradley told anyone who'd listen. "Come January, he'll be tearing that monstrosity down and building it right." The other settlers agreed. Brennick's chimney took 6 weeks to complete, 3 times longer than conventional designs. It required careful stone selection, precise measurements, and an understanding of airflow that seemed divorced from practical frontier life. By November, when the first snows arrived, 17 families in Fraser Valley had functional, simple chimneys. And one family had Brennick's elaborate experiment. Hit that like button if you're curious what happened when the real cold arrived. Subscribe to see frontier engineering put to the ultimate test. The fundamental misunderstanding wasn't about Brennick's skill. It was about what a chimney could be. To Bradley and the other builders, a chimney served one purpose: remove smoke. Efficiency meant good draft. Anything else was decoration or delusion. Brennick saw the chimney as a thermal battery. Standard frontier chimneys of the 1870s were built from a single wall of stone, typically 12 to 18 inches thick, rising straight from firebox to roof peak. They worked. Smoke escaped. Heat radiated from the firebox itself. But the chimney, the massive column of stone running through the cabin's center, remained largely inert. Hot gases rushed up and out, carrying roughly 68% of the fire's energy directly into the sky. Brennick's double-wall design changed the equation entirely. The inner wall, exposed directly to smoke and hot gases, reached temperatures exceeding 400 degrees Fahrenheit during active burning. But instead of that heat immediately dissipating outside, the 4-inch air gap trapped it. Cool air, drawn in through deliberate gaps at the foundation level, rose through this channel as it warmed, creating a continuous convection current that lasted hours after the fire died. The outer wall never touched smoke. It didn't need to. Heat radiated across the air gap, warming the limestone slowly and steadily. Because limestone has a thermal capacity of roughly 0.22 BTU per pound per degree Fahrenheit, and Brennick's outer wall weighed approximately 1,800 pounds, it could store and slowly release around 12,000 BTUs over 8 to 10 hours. For comparison, a pound of pine, the primary fuel in Fraser Valley, contains about 8,600 BTUs when burned. Brennick's chimney captured and stored the equivalent energy of nearly 1.5 pounds of wood with every fire. It's just heavy, Bradley argued when shown the calculations by a surveyor familiar with engineering principles. Heavy doesn't mean efficient. It means he wasted stone that could have built a proper smokehouse. What Bradley couldn't see was the angled smoke chamber at the top. That 47-degree bend served as more than a design flourish. Standard chimneys allowed gases to rush upward in a nearly straight path. Fast draft, quick exit, minimal heat transfer. Brennick's angle forced the smoke to slow and swirl for approximately 8 seconds longer before escaping. In those 8 seconds, traveling across 18 inches of angled channel, the inner wall absorbed an additional 12 to 15% of the exhaust heat. He's choking his own draft, predicted Martin Foss, who'd built cabins throughout the Rockies for 2 decades. Come deep winter, when he needs strong draw to prevent backdraft, that bend will fill his cabin with smoke. The criticism intensified when temperatures dropped below freezing in mid-November. Conventional wisdom held that chimneys needed to be as straight as possible to maintain draft in cold air, and Fraser Valley cold was notorious. Several neighbors made friendly wagers that Brennick's first real fire would smoke him out of his own cabin. It didn't. The draft, while slightly slower than standard designs, remained consistent. The angled chamber, rather than impeding flow, created a slight Venturi effect as gases compressed and accelerated past the bend. More importantly, the massive thermal mass of the chimney, now totaling nearly 4,000 pounds of stone, meant that once warmed, it maintained enough temperature differential to sustain steady updraft even when outdoor temperatures plunged. But none of this convinced the skeptics. They saw complexity, wasted labor, the stubbornness of a man too proud to admit he'd over-engineered a simple problem. By December 1879, Brennick's chimney had become a cautionary tale, the kind of mistake newcomers made when they didn't listen to men who knew the land. Then January arrived. January 11th, 1880. The sky over Fraser Valley turned the color of old iron. Veteran settlers recognized the signs. High, thin clouds, absolutely still air, the particular quality of silence that preceded the worst cold. By sunset, the temperature had dropped to 4 degrees Fahrenheit. By midnight, it reached -8 degrees Fahrenheit. By dawn on January 12th, it was -22 degrees Fahrenheit and falling. This wasn't normal frontier cold. This was the kind of cold that killed livestock in their barns, froze water in covered buckets, turned butter hard as stone. The kind of cold that made breathing painful and sleep dangerous. James Walcott woke at 4 a.m. on January 12th to feed his fire. The interior temperature of his cabin, which he measured with a mercury thermometer mounted near his bed, read 34 degrees Fahrenheit. He'd let the fire die too low during the night. He added wood, dry pine splits, well seasoned, and watched the flames build. An hour later, with the firebox roaring and consuming wood at an alarming rate, his cabin reached 41 degrees Fahrenheit. By midday, burning continuously, Walcott maintained an interior temperature of 43 degrees Fahrenheit, comfortable enough to avoid frostbite, not comfortable enough to remove his coat. His wife kept blankets wrapped around their two children. They'd gone through nearly half their weekly firewood allocation in one morning. Thomas Bradley's cabin, built with his own professionally constructed chimney, fared slightly better. His thicker walls and lower ceiling helped. By noon, with an aggressive fire, he achieved 47 degrees Fahrenheit. He burned through 18 splits of pine, approximately 32 pounds of wood, in 6 hours. At Samuel Brennick's cabin, the temperature at dawn had been 52 degrees Fahrenheit. The fire had burned out completely around midnight, yet the massive double-walled chimney continued radiating stored heat. Brennick rebuilt the fire at 5 a.m., not frantically, but methodically, using 6 splits of pine to establish steady flames. By 7 a.m., his cabin reached 61 degrees Fahrenheit. By 9 a.m., 66 degrees Fahrenheit. By noon, with the fire maintained at a moderate level, not roaring, not consuming wood faster than it could release heat, the cabin held steady at 68 degrees Fahrenheit. The difference wasn't subtle. Brennick's children played on the floor in light clothes. His wife baked bread without shivering. The air felt genuinely warm, not just not freezing. And most remarkably, Brennick had used 11 splits of pine since dawn, roughly half of what Bradley burned, 2/3 of what Walcott consumed. The thermodynamics were undeniable. Brennick's 4,000-pound thermal mass had absorbed heat throughout the previous evening's fire. When the flames died, the stone didn't suddenly cool. It released energy gradually, maintaining baseline warmth through the coldest hours. When morning fires began, the chimney was already warm. It reached optimal operating temperature faster, stored more energy with each log, and radiated that heat continuously from 2 surfaces instead of 1. The outer wall, in particular, proved crucial. While the inner wall spiked and cooled with fire cycles, the outer limestone maintained a steadier temperature, ranging from 95 degrees Fahrenheit near the firebox to 72 degrees Fahrenheit at shoulder height. That consistent warmth radiated in all directions, heating not just the space near the hearth but the entire cabin volume. By January 14th, after 3 days of sustained cold, temperatures never rising above -12 degrees Fahrenheit, the pattern was impossible to ignore. Brennick maintained 65 to 70 degrees Fahrenheit interiors using approximately 40% less wood than his neighbors. His family slept comfortably. His water never froze. His fire, though requiring attention every 4 hours, didn't demand the frantic feeding that other settlers endured. Martin Foss walked to Brennick's cabin on the afternoon of January 15th. He stood near the chimney, felt the warmth radiating from stones 2 feet away from the firebox, and asked the question that Bradley and Walcott hadn't yet voiced. "How much stone is in this thing?" "Near 2 tons, Brennick replied. "Sandstone inner, limestone outer, river rock, and clay in the gap." Foss touched the outer wall. "Warm. Not hot, warm. Like a living thing, breathing heat into the frozen morning." "You built a stove," he said finally. "Not a chimney. A stove." Brennick smiled slightly. "In the Highlands, we call it a heat wall. Stone remembers fire long after wood forgets." The cold snap broke on January 18th, 1880. Temperatures rose to a relatively balmy 15 degrees Fahrenheit, and Fraser Valley settlers emerged to assess damage. Livestock losses were significant. 3 families lost cattle, 2 lost horses. Firewood reserves were depleted, and every cabin builder in the valley knew that what they'd been doing wasn't sufficient. Thomas Bradley was the first to ask. He found Brennick splitting wood behind his cabin on January 20th. "The angle at the top," Bradley said without preamble. "What's the exact degree?" 47, Brennick replied. "Could be 45 to 50. But not more than 55. You lose too much velocity and risk backdraft." And the gap? "For inches, 3 to 5 works. 4 is optimal for convection without losing structural strength." Bradley nodded slowly. "I called it Highland ignorance." "You did. I was wrong." By February 1880, 3 families had commissioned Brennick to rebuild their chimneys. He worked methodically, training local masons in the double wall technique. Each chimney took 4 to 5 weeks, longer than anyone wanted to wait, but the winter had taught patience. By April, 7 cabins in Fraser Valley featured variations of Brennick's design. The modifications were telling. Martin Foss, practical and cost-conscious, simplified the smoke chamber angle to 45 degrees and used local fieldstone instead of quarried limestone for the outer wall. Performance decreased slightly. His cabin ran about 4 degrees Fahrenheit cooler than Brennick's under identical conditions. But the reduction in construction time and material cost made the trade worthwhile. James Walcott went the opposite direction. He increased thermal mass by extending the chimney width from 30 inches to 36 inches and incorporated a baking oven into the outer wall at waist height. The additional stone, approximately 600 pounds, extended heat retention from 8 hours to nearly 11 hours after fires died. His cabin became the warmest in the valley, though it required 50% more stone and 7 weeks to complete. Word spread beyond Fraser Valley. By autumn 1880, a surveyor traveling through the region documented the unusual chimneys and carried sketches to settlements in South Park and Middle Park. A timber contractor from Wyoming Territory visited Brennick specifically to study the design, taking detailed measurements and notes. The following winter, 1880 to 1881, wasn't as severe as the previous year, but it provided consistent data. Cabins with double-wall chimneys maintained interior temperatures averaging 22 to 28 degrees Fahrenheit warmer than conventional designs, while consuming 35 to 45% less firewood. The variance depended on construction quality, stone selection, and chimney mass, but the fundamental advantage remained consistent. By spring 1881, Thomas Bradley had built 4 double-walled chimneys for paying clients. He'd refined the technique, developing a standardized approach that balanced thermal performance with construction efficiency. His version used mixed stone, dense granite for the inner wall, lighter sandstone outside, and incorporated adjustable dampers at the foundation level to control convection flow. "I still think it's overcomplicated," Bradley admitted to Brennick in March 1881. "But it works, and that's what matters when it's 20 below." By 1882, oral histories and local records suggest that 23 cabins within 50 miles of Fraser Valley had incorporated some version of thermal mass chimney design. The exact configurations varied. Some used brick instead of stone, some integrated metal plates to enhance radiation, some experimented with triple wall designs, though these proved structurally challenging. But the core principle remained: don't let heat escape, store it, slow it, make it work before it leaves. The technique didn't achieve universal adoption. Standard chimneys remained common, particularly among settlers who lacked stoneworking skills or who prioritized construction speed over thermal efficiency. But among those who'd experienced true high-country cold, who'd burned through winter with supplies by February, who understood that survival sometimes meant engineering, Brennick's crazy chimney became accepted wisdom. If this frontier innovation impressed you, hit that subscribe button. Drop a comment about historic building techniques you've encountered. By 1885, variations of Brennick's design had appeared in Montana Territory, Wyoming, and isolated settlements throughout the Rockies. The proliferation wasn't coordinated or documented in engineering journals. It spread the way practical knowledge always has, through observation, conversation, and the fundamental logic of that worked. We should try it. What's remarkable isn't that the design spread, but what it revealed about the assumptions frontier builders had carried west. The standard chimney, single wall, straight draft, minimal thermal mass, wasn't based on engineering principles. It was based on tradition, on what had worked in Pennsylvania and Ohio and Kentucky, in climates less severe and with wood supplies more abundant. Brennick hadn't invented thermal mass heating. Cultures from Scandinavia to Korea to the Scottish Islands had been building heat-retaining masonry for centuries. Russian stoves, Chinese kangs, German grunnefens, all operated on the same fundamental understanding. Stone stores what fire produces, and stored heat is usable heat. What Brennick did was adapt that ancient knowledge to frontier conditions. He didn't have brick factories or tile kilns. He had river stone, quarried sandstone, and limestone. He didn't have metal radiators or complex damper systems. He had clay, patience, and an understanding that mass matters. The lesson went deeper than construction technique. Every settler who dismissed Brennick's design did so from experience. Real, hard-won experience building in difficult conditions. They weren't fools. They were practitioners of established methods that had served them adequately. Adequately, but not optimally. The difference between adequate and optimal becomes visible only under stress. At 20 degrees Fahrenheit, a standard chimney works. At minus 22 degrees Fahrenheit, it becomes the difference between comfort and endurance, between adequate and struggling, between using winter's wood supply wisely and burning through it by January. Samuel Brennick died in 1891, at age 53, from pneumonia. His cabin, with its double-walled chimney, continued serving his family for another 2 decades. When it was finally dismantled in 1910, the stones from the chimney were salvaged and incorporated into 3 separate buildings. Homesteaders recognized quality material when they saw it. Stone that had proven itself through 30 winters didn't deserve a rubble pile. There's no monument to Brennick in Fraser Valley. No historical marker explains what he built or why it mattered. But in certain old homes throughout the Rockies, if you look closely at the chimney, you'll notice unusual thickness. An odd angle near the top. Stones selected with care that seems excessive for something that just needs to contain smoke. Those chimneys are the monument. Every one represents a moment when someone chose to believe that traditional knowledge, refined through centuries of cold winters and scarce fuel, might have something to teach frontier pragmatism. They represent the humility to admit that the way we've always done it isn't always the way it should be done. The irony is that in 1879, Brennick's neighbors thought his complexity revealed ignorance, a newcomer who didn't understand frontier simplicity. What it actually revealed was their own limitation, mistaking simplicity for wisdom and tradition for optimization. The cold proved otherwise. It always does. In survival, in engineering, in the quiet contest between adequate and optimal, reality doesn't care about reputation or experience or how many chimneys you've built before. It cares about degrees Fahrenheit, BTUs stored, and whether your children sleep warm through January nights. Brennick understood that, not because he was smarter than his neighbors, but because he came from a place where winter had been teaching that lesson for 1,000 years. He didn't invent the principle. He just remembered what others had forgotten. That stone, properly used, is more than structure. It's memory. It's a battery. It's the difference between surviving winter and enduring it with dignity. If you found value in this piece of frontier wisdom, hit that like button and subscribe for more historical survival techniques that actually work. Comment below if you've encountered unusual heating methods in old homesteads. We'd love to hear your stories. And remember, sometimes the crazy idea is just knowledge that's older and wiser than our assumptions.